All right, we are live. Anneli, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, guys.
I've been really
Nice.
looking forward to this for sure. Those listening to the pod will know that Mark and I spend a lot of our time these days thinking about recruiting. And between my course, the Copilot, this thing we built together called Insider Loops. So we're just getting really deep into how companies are just evaluating specifically product managers these days. And I know that's not exactly where you focus exclusively, but you have a really interesting perspective because I think a lot of people in our audience either considering going to earlier stage startups or are considering maybe horizontal moves within the earlier stage startup world. And let's define that as, Series A to maybe pre-IPO, Series D-ish. And you spend all of your time thinking about helping companies and that exact stage meet their headcount needs and their talent needs. And you've also led recruiting at Figma. You've really, really helped Notion bootstrap their entire recruiting motion. It sounds like from scratch, spent a lot of time at Palantir. So it's an interesting moment right now. You have all this like historical context and things are super dynamic in the recruiting space. I just want to maybe kick off the conversation with what are some of the things that you're kind of observing right now in the early stage recruiting space that feel just like either surprising relative to how things worked in the past, or maybe just like big waves that are changing? Just would love to kind of hear your high level thoughts on what's unique about this moment.
Well, there's a lot of talk about AI making people's jobs easier, but I think in recruiting, it's the reverse, where everything has gotten so much harder. And I think when you see this downward pressure on headcount and this pressure from executives and investors to increase the revenue per employee count, and executives really want to maximize productivity for every single hire, particularly working in startups versus a large company when you need to hire like 100 PMs or something. And then in a startup, you get your one. And it was already the case. That person had to be so many things. They had to be strategic. They had to be in the weeds. They had to be autonomous and just like everything, executive presence, like all those things. I just think that the pressure has gotten even greater to find the very, very, very best people. And we're feeling a ton of that pressure in recruiting. And so I think that recruiting, I used to be a CPA for context, and I entered the profession thinking recruiting would be so easy. And maybe I thought that was true for a while. And I was working for really cool companies that everyone wanted to work at. Palantir has a great offer accept rate, and Figma as well. Working with these early stage companies that don't have a brand yet, and you're just fighting for every hire was already hard. And I'm just increasingly finding over time like a huge appreciation for how hard this is.
So just to double click, what I'm hearing is that your clients, like the startups themselves, or maybe the VCs that are pairing you with clients that are these early stage companies, I'm hearing that their bar, it's like something like their bar is going up / like their willingness to compromise on finding like the exact right person is not wavering maybe as much as it used to in previous times. Is that
It was
fair?
already hard. It was already hard, but yes, on average, I would say it's getting harder. Recruiters
And
are asked to do more with less. Recruiters are asked to fill less headcount with better people. And that's a really hard space to be in.
it sounds like too that kind of the ask from these founders or companies are to do the same for like the people that you're hiring, right? So if you're hiring, let's say like an engineer or a product manager, it sounds like, hey, like this person has to be more productive, right? Maybe do what maybe 2 engineers or 2 PMs did before. And I think one, it's like a really hard thing to just find. But I'm also curious, like how do you what do you look for, right? When someone else like, hey, like I need a PM that really can give us a lot of leverage. How does that maybe translate into competencies or?
Yeah. So I think PMs and recruiter search have a lot in common, by the way, because if you think about an early company and they're hiring an eng team, and it's very common to go from 10 to 20 engineers very quickly. But in that same time period, you might get 1, maybe 2 PMs and 1 or 2 recruiters, maybe not, actually. You might just outsource the thing or have the founder run the product thing. But anyway, there becomes a point where you get your 1. And so already this space of product recruiting and hiring your first recruiters is some of the hardest things that we do. And so there's a lot of work on expectation setting and creating buckets of skills and qualities that are important to this team and setting expectations that probably you're not going to get every single thing. And where are the areas that we can wiggle a little bit? Usually they don't know that right away, and it shakes out during an interview process as they start to talk to people and they start to realize maybe they do need someone more senior when previously they thought better not. But it could be the reverse also, where they realize that they don't need someone more senior because they're not going to get in the weeds in the way that they thought. And every company is going to be different and have different cultures and values that they optimize for. And one trait in one company could be really impressive to some hiring managers versus another. It could be the thing that they don't want. So there's always a little bit of flexibility within that. But if I were to say, on average, if we're hiring the very first person, probably they have 7 to 12 years of experience. Probably they're a very senior strategic IC, or maybe newer to management and don't mind going back to it, but not much more senior than that. In the product realm specifically, and also for design search, there's a lot of emphasis on the companies they recently worked at and that the product has a lot of similarities and relevance. So if you're working in a collaboration tool, there's a lot of value around having worked in collaboration tools already, versus sometimes I think in engineering, it's a little bit more agnostic and based on their coding skills or their tech stack experience. And so there's an indexing on the companies that these people have worked for. In PMs and recruiters need to be able to influence a team. And so in recruiting, the hard thing is you have to impress the technical and the business teams sometimes when you're this first person. That's really hard to get alignment on. And I would say the same thing in product, because I heard in one of your prior podcasts, I think it was Ben, you were mentioning how in early companies, this PM is not interviewing with a team of PMs, they're interviewing with engineers and the founder. And
There are no other
marketing
PMs
team.
oftentimes. Yeah. I've been the first
gotta
PM
get
3 times. There's like
marketing
no
like
other
you.
PMs. Yeah.
You got to get go-to-markets like you and technical people, and they don't always have the same ideas of what they want. So I would say some companies might refer to it as executive presence and the ability to gain influence with the CEO and trust. But certainly I would say just technical competence in the specific interesting areas of the product are big ones.
Yeah, the domain experience piece is super interesting because I think, during, call it ZERP, I think there's a lot of generalist PM hiring. I mean, I've basically never been hired into a PM role where I already had domain experience. So it was kind of very much a nice to have, maybe not even important to have it based on my success in interviews in the past. And nowadays, when I work with candidates and I talk to people that are hiring, it's like domain expertise seems to have kind of become like a first-class citizen and like the requirements, and it kind of graduated from nice to have to must have. I'm just curious, like, do you have any thoughts on why you think that might be happening?
I think the ZERP comment is a very important context. So if we look back over the last 6 years that I've run Boulevard, we haven't had any normal market. And maybe there's no such thing as normal, and I'm being naive here. But I started in late 2019, just before COVID. And then we had this ZERP boom in hiring. And then we had this dramatic tech layoffs crash. But then right then AI came out. And so I would say that this is the weirdest market I've ever seen, where AI is really skewing things. Because you've got some areas where it just looks like we're thriving and the highest salary budgets you've ever seen. And for those few individuals that qualify for these jobs that get the offers, this is like a crazy time for them. We see startups that I would say $200,000 was really painful for startups for a long time. But then in the ZERP area, people started getting crazy salaries, but then the salaries came way down. And now it's back to where we're seeing some startups paying PMs and engineers over $300,000 in some instances, which is insane. But it's like, I have to coach my recruiters, don't get carried away that this is what's happening everywhere, because we've still got some startups that are not on the forefront of AI that cannot afford that. And this is not the broader trend, and it's skewing the market in that way. And so can you reel me back into what your question was?
Yeah. No, I think the
gone on a
domain,
tangent.
totally. No, that's not a tangent at all. I mean, what I'm hearing is like the companies are basically saying we need less people. And because we need less people, or we want people that have higher leverage, it sounds like basically the fundamental budgeting equation for headcount has kind of shifted to more chips behind a smaller number of slots on the table. So like bigger comp packages for a smaller number of people. And maybe in the process of setting that higher bar, somehow like the domain experience seems to have kind of
Yes.
graduate into
think,
like a must have. Yeah.
yeah, and to where I was going with this was the ZERB context is incredibly important because it's not just AI in isolation that is producing this, it's the timing against this super boom and then the crash, where companies were getting really cheap money and scaling really rapidly and extending really exaggerated offers. And a lot of startups died and stopped getting funded when the market crashed. And so CEOs started being really strict about budgets and strict about headcounts, and they were already on this trend. And then AI added this layer of like, oh, now there's this downward pressure on our headcount and our output, and just this expectation just went up of the individual's contribution. And so the marrying of those two things back to back, I think, is creating this situation that we're in where whether it's domain expertise or whatever criteria you want to put on it, hiring managers think they can ask more on average. And I do think this is still a company's market, not the candidate's market, unless if you are one of like a very select list of AI specialized folks that everybody's going after.
Yeah. I mean, it almost feels like there's just so many, like the list of like domain expertise, like there's so many dimensions to it that I've heard, and some companies just want it all. Like I've seen like, hey, like I need someone who has taken the company, a previous company from 20 million to 100 million. Like that's one requirement. The other one is like, hey, I want someone who
who's worked
in the
in agriculture tech or insurance tech. Yeah, exactly.
Like that super specific industry. And another one is like, hey, I need someone who also has expertise in like, I don't know, like security or you know, like, or like product-led growth. Like it almost feels like there's some companies are just stacking all these requirements that make like the pool of people that qualify super small. And I'm curious, like from your experience, like, and it's funny, I also hear the frustration from the other side of the party, which is people who are interviewing. They're like, this is insane. Like, you know, like I've met like 3 out of those 5 and I think I should be a great person, but this company doesn't believe so. So I'm curious, like, how do you like, in your opinion, how do you stack rank those like requirements? Like, and how do you help companies figure out, hey, like which out of all of these things, like which one is the one that you should prioritize or the one that you should, or how you,
Let me think I think that when I'm recruiting for our recruiting teams, I am very vocal about what works, what doesn't. Do not even think about going down that path. That's going to blow up. I feel less confident doing that when we're hiring PMs and engineers and anything outside of recruiting. And I feel that my role in that and my recruiters' roles in that is more to be a support to that team. But as the people on the ground that are talking to all these candidates, we're looking at the profiles and doing the initial screens, I think it's really on us to bring the data to the hiring team to set expectations and nudge them. But I don't know if I would tell a CEO to de-emphasize executive presence or to de-emphasize domain expertise. I think at that point, that's their call. And my job is more, let me track everything and report on everything and be very metrics focused and show them what are the trade-offs so that they can then make that call.
So basically, if you feel like they're adding, you know, let's say 3 criteria that are must-haves, you're like, plenty of people in that pool, no problem. I can get you a bunch of those people tomorrow. But then they add a 4th criteria and you're like, that one is going to actually cause like the pool to dwindle by 90%. So we're going to have to be really mindful about that one. Is that kind of how you advise them to think about adding these criteria?
Yeah, and we refer to that commonly in recruiting as market mapping, where you are just documenting everything that you do and you say, okay, give me your top 10 target companies, give me your nice to have and your must have criteria. I'm going to report back on the total number that were very squarely in what you asked me for. And sometimes you get to a point where you've reviewed 2,000 profiles and they only liked 3. And so then you show them, well, if we were to loosen on this criteria versus this one, that would expand your pool to 12 or 23 or whatever the case may be. But it's kind of like a cover your ass moment too, because you just need to get ahead of, this is going to be slow. You know, like I'm telling you now, this is going to be slow and you have these levers to pull if you want us to go faster, or you can sign up on us just being really strict about this, but you need to understand this is going to be expensive.
And yeah, I think there's something really interesting that recruiting does. That's like, the market mapping. And something that I've always been fascinating is that I think it's just like super impressive is that I've seen some of those market maps and they're like an amount of information that you have. And it's, I don't know where you guys get it from, but it's very detailed, right? Because I go into people's LinkedIns and I'm like, wait, this person did not specify that they took this company from 20 million to 100 million, but somehow the best recruiting firms have access to that information. So
Yeah.
kind of
AI
where
is
my head
helping
is
with that.
yeah,
AI is helping with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, say
So it
more.
used to be a lot of it was the Crunchbase database. And you could like pull reports based on tagging and try to narrow in on what dates companies raised funding and what were their relative headcounts. But I think that talking with AI pulls the research a lot faster. And then you also have in some of these sourcing tools where you could even use a LLM. Like I was working on with my team, coaching them on a very niche search, like super, super niche. And a lot of the tech language was unfamiliar to us. And so we were dropping PDFs of profiles from LinkedIn into the LLM to just pull out whether this was a good candidate or not. And it was able to cross-check what stage they were within that company, what was the revenue growth, if you specifically ask it to do that.
that's really cool. Is there, I mean, where my head is going to is like, I'm always thinking of like, how can I help people that, might be interviewing in a year or two to make sure that like they increase the chances of like the LLMs finding them or someone like you finding them to make sure they're not missed in that market mapping. So is there anything that those people can do? Like, I mean, it can be as simple as like, hey, like maybe just add this bullet in your LinkedIn, but anything else that would increase your chances of being part of like that market map for a specific role?
Well, it depends on the role. But if we're talking about first product managers in general of SaaS companies, I think so much of it is based on the companies you've worked for. In this realm that I'm speaking, I think there's a lot more flexibility when you're hiring out large teams. And when you're finding 10 engineers, you can have one be more front-end leaning and one more back-end leaning and one more senior, one more junior, and et cetera. But if we're talking about first PMs, I think there is an appreciation for more steady resumes and staying a place for a while and seeing the full product cycle and working through some hard moments of the product development and doing it internally versus for an agency where you can just like really get into the nitty-gritty sort of problems I've heard from hiring managers. But in terms of, so a lot of it is going to show up just because recruiters in product search target companies a lot. And you don't need to spell out in a bullet that you have experience in something if they're just off the target companies. But certainly if in the way that things are going, having any sort of experience with AI tools or AI agents or just some sort of specialized AI knowledge is probably going to be increasingly important over the next couple of years. I think one of the harder things about answering this question is it feels very uncertain and just where is this going? I have no idea.
Yeah.
It's kind of like flying by the seat of our pants.
But it seems like, for example, if someone, let's say they want to work at, something that I like to think about and tell people is like, you don't have to, you have to think about like 2 roles from now and like start to kind of make your way to that role. And I think because for the exact same reason that you just said, right? Like a lot of people look, hey, like what did you have? Let's say, for example, like in my next, not my next role, but the second role that I want, and it's like, let's say I want to be a PM at Figma or at Notion, right? It sounds like the smart thing to do might be, hey, maybe can my next role be in a company that's already doing collaboration? So then when those companies are doing their search, I show up because I was affiliated to, I don't know, like Asana or Linear or whatever. So it sounds like starting to think about those ways, it could be a good way to make sure that, hey, like if I make this next move in my next role, like I'm going to be increasing the chances of showing up in that market map, basically.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a perfect example of I started as an accountant and then I became a recruiter. And sometimes people just don't know where they're going or what they're going to do or really have a crystallized path and goal for themselves. And I think that sometimes you just have to try different things until you really hone in on what you're passionate about. But the more thought and reflection you can do on where you're going and where is this all building, the earlier the better, because from a recruiter's perspective, you do want to see something that's building and start to be more and more impressive. And I think I see a couple different buckets of profiles that are interesting. So usually you want to see something, at least when we're talking about in tech, we're kind of stops for companies that are just producing amazing products. Like everybody wants to hire out of Figma and Notion. Like this is just, everybody's going to ask for that one. But they also want startup experience, ideally. So ideally a hiring manager in a startup wants some person who's scaled a successful startup from early to late. Now, the trick is that most of those people don't want to do it again. So that's a problem. So then their next request is going to be, okay, well, at least they worked in an early stage company and they know what they're getting into. But then when you start to go too far down that path with startups that weren't successful, they start to lose interest because they're like, oh, I don't recognize any of these brands or products. Like, that's not impressive. So there's another path to work at the Metas and the Instagrams of the world and the Googles and et cetera. And then go to an unknown startup, and that works as well.
Yeah. I mean, I always feel like I'm a hypocrite when I give people advice to do something that's different than what I've done. And I think I never thought, Mark, to like two roles ahead with any of my roles. Like basically every time I made a move, it was always maybe with slightly rose tinted glasses, but wanting it to be something that would be like a 5 to 10 year experience, right? Like I've never made a move that was explicitly meant to be a short-term stint.
Yeah.
And then there's always some learnings that come on the ground, on the field, from what it's actually like in that experience. Then I incorporate those learnings and what, like sometimes they're internal, reflections and like what I'm really good at that I learn from that role. And sometimes it's about my interests and sometimes about what I don't like and the kind of team I want and the kind of product and the business model and the stage. And there's like all these things that incorporate that into the next move. So for me, I know it's good advice. And a lot of people have that advice. Like Nikhil Singhal, like from the Skip community, talks about your skip role. It's always think about like one role ahead. But I personally feel like I didn't follow that advice, and I'm very grateful for the path I've taken, because it feels like I don't know if I could have ever anticipated what I want to do beyond a given role. It's always about like, let me get more data and then I can make a better decision about what feels right. So that's usually what I try to help people find. And I think it can be a little hard because it's risky, right? Like to feel like you don't really have like a long-term plan and you're just optimizing for like the next thing.
Yeah. And I think also there's a lot of vibes of like, hey, like you need to make sure that there's like a clear narrative of your career, because that's like basically how you get in the door, right? Like you have that first like call with a recruiter. You want to make sure that, hey, like there's some sense and something that makes, that makes it obvious that why this is the next step, right? And sometimes
it's all in the transition.
That's a risk.
Yeah, like telling that story to recruiters for me, because it's not like I recently became like a little zigzaggy in my career. I started in investment banking, and I was a failed founder, and then I got into customer support and found my way into product management and went small company, big company, and now I'm doing whatever this is. And I'd say the thing that people can struggle to tell that story if it's hard to explain the transitions. So like what was the thought process that made me go from this to this and this to this? And so I think I've gotten enough reps telling my story that people hear the kinds of things that I want them to hear, which is like fast learner, doesn't like thrive well with like bad teams or like unclear expectations, and like someone who's extremely focused on impact and really values the people that they work with and how they feel about how they spend their time and the impact they're making in the world. Like that comes through the story. So I tell people, I get these emails all the time from people like, how do I explain like a short stint, or how do I explain some time off or a sabbatical? And I'm like, if you're a PM, you got to be good at storytelling. So, tell the story.
Yeah. That's something you're being tested on. And so I would say that preparing and having a really crystallized story that's compelling, that makes sense, is good. And then sometimes you can even put that on your LinkedIn profile within the individual companies, why you joined, what you're excited about.
And I also think the more authentic that story is, the more you're helping the recruiter filter you out from a role that would not be good for you. Because I tell people, it's like the goal is not to get the job. The goal is to find a good fit. You want to find a place that's going to be a good fit for you. So the more
I will say that's a very big place of privilege too. I think most of the people that we work with are in that position and have been very intentional, worked in some critical places, and should be very thoughtful and filter out companies. And then you've got some people, I think there is a downsizing in the number of job openings that's making it harder for some people that just need a job. And so they have to be strategic about that as well.
Yeah. And I'm the first person that says, like, I understand the need to act out of a place of financial responsibility for family. Sometimes people, I've worked with plenty of people that are the single earner in the household. And so if they lose their job, they're starting to run into very scary territory from a financial perspective. So I want to be really mindful of that. And at the same time, and it's not, I tell people, don't blame me for saying this. It just seems to be kind of like how the world works. If you approach interviews from a place of fear or a place of scarcity mindset,
it's so hard.
or desperation, you're going to have less of a chance to succeed in the interviews.
100%.
Yeah.
The people who have the jobs are coming across less needing it and more confident and able to focus on why they're actually having this conversation. Why would they consider leaving at this point? But if you are coming from a place of desperation, that play out well for you. That's so hard being a recruiter watching this, by the way. Those are the people who want to help out. But well, because let's just bring it into my company. So recruiting has been through the ringer over the last 6 years. And we had a market where people were getting insane salaries and really cool jobs. And then all of a sudden, massive layoffs, and there's less recruiting jobs than the number of recruiters. And so the compensation went down. And now suddenly you have all these senior recruiters in the market that would have been impossible to hire previously. And interviewing them, you see people who have been managers for a long time. And so in recruiting, you have this natural question of like, why an IC role now? And sometimes they will answer you with some answer they came up with. But oftentimes you can feel that's not true. They're gaming the system right now. They know as recruiters what they need to be asked, what they need to be answering. I think if they were just really honest, it would be the market tanked and I need a job. And so that's where the jobs are. And I'm going to do this. And we've had people, for example, assure me that they were totally in it. And then they quit like 3 to 6 weeks later when they get a manager job somewhere else. And so it's just really hard because I think recruiters just naturally are very empathetic and want to help. And that is something that hiring managers are looking at their internal motivation.
Sorry, Mark, I have a quick follow-up if you don't mind, but like, I'm just curious, like what's going through the head of a recruiter, a high-performing recruiter like you and the people that you work with, when you hear a candidate level with you and say why they're looking for a job that isn't the polished answer that they think you want to hear, but like the real talk of, like, if they actually just say, market tanked, I need a job. Like, how does that come off?
I think that's going to land different with different people, different values and different cultures. And for me, I love that answer. I can work with that answer. And I tend to be just very, very blunt and authentic and open, taking risks at some point in my interview processes. And I think actually Palantir was a really good place for me in that way. I was like really raw and authentic and shared some weaknesses and some pains. And I directly asked them what their hesitations were about me. And like, it was just a place where it was like radical candor all the way. But I think there's other places that don't appreciate it as much. So I think it's going to land differently based on who you're talking to. But if it were me, I would really appreciate that answer.
Yeah. But my sense too is that you can also have like, that can lead to a much better conversation too, right? Be like, cool. Like, okay, it sounds like I understand where you're coming from. It seems like you need a job and you're committed to like, so then you can ask questions like, hey, like, how do I know that you're just not going to bail in a year when you find a better opportunity, right? Like you can have that level-headed conversation, and that I think but also you kind of build that trust. So like, I can trust this person because they came clean and now
absolutely. Yes. As a founder, I get to say, well, here's my concern. Like, as you can see, like, I'm scared this has happened to me before. Like, if you were to just come and immediately leave and then have to discount my client's invoice and now I'm taking a financial loss and I just spent all this time ramping, like, you get an opportunity to say, how do we make this work for both of us? Can we set it up as a contract for a certain period of time? Can you commit to being here through the end of the year? Like, to just have those conversations that make it work more for everybody.
And that person's going to be hungry too, right? Like they just probably had like a tough, 5-6 months looking for a job. They want to do good work.
If you're enjoying this conversation, please check out the links in the show notes to support the podcast. Mark and I do this out of love, but to keep it going, we also need your support. Thanks, and now back to the episode.
I feel like I need to clarify. I'm speaking as somebody that has roughly 28 recruiters. I can't remember. And so we're more in that engineering team position of you can hire just like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and have a larger team. When it's the very first PM, company isn't going to let you stay through the end of the year as your commitment, And so it's hard. I think in that case, you would have to be willing to say somewhat compellingly that you're willing to stick it out for some period.
I mean, I think there's like such an art to like navigating these the positioning conversations about yourself. But if someone's listening and they're like, the truth is they just need a job, right? Like they're eating into savings, that maybe they're in a somewhat dire, there's an urgency, okay, to get back to work. The thing that I think they have going for them that is a superpower or a strength that I think they should highlight is they're hungry and they really want to work like super hard, and that they're thirsty for an opportunity, hungry for an opportunity to just make an impact. And they want to be successful because they don't want to be back in this position. They want to crush this job so that they don't have to be in this market anymore. And that
maybe
and
loyalty too, right? Like, hey, you helped me in this tough moment. I'm going to remember this, right? Like, not a lot of people took a chance on me.
Exactly. And then, to bring in, and because candidates, by the way, I'm assuming the person we're talking about, this kind of persona is currently unemployed. I don't want to say you have time to explore hobbies and stuff. Maybe you have some of that, but like, if you're not in an interview, you're not like literally preparing for an interview or doing a take home or on a call with a recruiter or whatever, you do have time that I would be very mindful of, that you could use that time to create things that give you stories to tell in these conversations about what you've been doing during this period in which you're interviewing. And it can demonstrate, it's like showing, not telling. So like, what are you working on? Are you hacking on any stuff? Are you vibe coding things? Have you learned anything recently that is going to make you a better PM in your next role? Like, what are you actually shipping, right? And I think that my observation that seems to be true for me, and I think a lot of other people, is that if you can start to build some momentum and start to feel useful in some way, and it can really boost your confidence, even if you're feeling financial urgency. If you're shipping something and you're doing the thing, you're building product, you're kind of putting something in people's hands, talking to potential users, you can go into conversations from a place of, I need a job, but like, I'm learning so much right now and I can't wait to bring everything I'm learning right now into like my next job, and like really, operate in this new kind of way based on all these things I'm excited that I've been hacking on. Like, two completely different stories and ways of telling what you need, or coming at it from the same exact place of financial instability. But in one of them, you're demonstrating excitement and confidence and hunger. And I don't know, I think that's the right way to approach those conversations.
And you had a podcast recently too about the trend of managers going back to being ICs and how maybe that's a good strategy. And I think that if somebody could really articulate that and show an understanding of this macro environment and what AI is doing to needing people to level their skills, and expressing how a great manager really has done the IC job and the IC role has changed since they were an IC. And I think there is a compelling story there.
For sure.
Totally packaging all of your learnings about managing people into how you're managing agents. Or, I mean, again, like I have not gone deep into the agent rabbit hole as much as some people, but if I was going for a PM role right now and I was trying to tell a story about why my experience over the last 5 to 10 years as a manager does not disqualify me from being a really strong IC right now, and I didn't have a job at the moment, I would absolutely be spending a ton of my time building the story about how I'm taking everything I learned about people management and bringing it to how I leverage AI tools and AI agents. And I mean, that's a compelling story.
Yeah. And I think for PMs too, like, you probably got into the job because you love building. And I think if you can kind of remind people of that, and then have examples where you keep doing that in your life, either side projects or even like an initiative out of work where you're actually the one executing, I think that can really help. One thing that I want to go back to that I think is really interesting that you said is, I think a lot of people don't have empathy of like for how tough it's been for recruiters in the last 6 years. Like, I think a lot of people are just really caught up in that dialogue of, hey, like, this company sucks because I applied and I did 5 interviews and they did not get back to me right away. Then when they got back to me and told me I didn't get the job, they didn't give me feedback, or they were not super, they didn't really like hold my hand and tell me it's going to be okay.
We're not super popular.
So,
sometimes we are, but often we're not.
Yeah, but I think also, like, I think what people are missing is that it's also not been easy for you, right? Like, I think like there's that empathy is missing. And something that Ben and I are both really deep believers on is that if you are able to build a good relationship with a recruiter, like, you're going to have such an edge over the person that doesn't. Because they at the end of the day, like, your incentive, like, if you are a good fit, your incentives are aligned and that person wants to see you succeed. the same that you want to succeed. So I'm hoping that maybe like if we can help people build some empathy to understand a little bit what's going behind the scenes, maybe we can help them start to be better about building relationships and seeing recruiters as allies as opposed to like, maybe having an antagonistic relationship, if that makes sense.
I appreciated that you talked about that in your hiring guide. I think that's a really good tip. And it's true that the recruiter is guarding everything that you need to be successful in this process. And so I think PMs are, on average, pretty well conditioned to being effective at that, given that a lot of their job is to influence people and engage people. And I think that they could very much use the recruiter as an asset.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
So if you... No, but I think one of the questions that came down as you're talking, Mark, is like, we had my friend Troy Sultan, who runs a company called Guide, on the podcast, and they build tools for recruiters and
scheduling, right?
Scheduling,
are they mostly
and
coordination, or do they do?
Yeah, I think they're building kind of like, I think they talk about like the Iron Man suit for like the recruiting coordinator is kind of like their starting point, and then there's a bunch of other stuff they do. But we talked to him. We asked him a flavor of the question of like, why are recruiters like ghosting candidates, or like what's going on behind the scenes? Like, because to Mark's point, it's a bit antagonistic. It's almost like the recruiter's like the face of the company, and like the company has all this dysfunction, I'm sure, that's happening, and ambiguity and chaos internally, and the recruiter's job is just be the face of the company to the candidate, and the candidate just sees emails and phone calls, but they don't see anything that's happening behind the scenes. So like, when a candidate is having like a poor candidate experience these days, like what do you think might be going on that they're not seeing on the company side that's leading to lack of responsiveness, poor updates, no feedback? Like what are some of those dynamics?
I would plus one everything that he said in that conversation you had, in terms of just the sheer volume, first of all, and also the trade-offs in time that are very real and zero sum. So certainly this AI situation is creating thousands of applicants per week on average. It's nuts. You also have AI tools to help you get through it more quickly. And then you have AI that can maybe customize some of your messaging. But at the end of the day, asking the recruiter to manually look at everything and reply very thoughtfully to every single candidate that comes across their desk is not possible, just based on resourcing. And then at the end of the day, when you're prioritizing your time, you are prioritizing the candidates that are latest in stage. If you have a candidate you're about to go to offer with and they're interviewing elsewhere and you need to close that, it's going to take your time every single time relative to the person that just had a first phone screen. And so it's really hard to scale giving this customized service to thousands of candidates every day. It's just not possible, actually. And so I think some ways that I've addressed this personally when I was recruiting as an IC more, but when you reject a candidate, maybe leave it somewhat generic, but say, hey, feel free to call me if you want some feedback, because what you'll find is that most candidates don't take you up on it. But the rare candidate,
That's
they don't.
Crazy.
It is crazy. I would expect a PM to take up on it more than in the other populations, probably. But no, I would bet usually they don't. And so, but it gives an opportunity for the people that really are willing to have that conversation to actually call you and have a conversation that isn't putting anything in writing and jeopardizing the risk of the company that recruiters have to protect. Also offering to have a chat and just filtering down to who will actually talk to you.
So what I'm hearing is basically two reasons a candidate might not get feedback at a high level from a recruiter. One, recruiter's just too busy. Like there's just too many threads, too many emails. The inbox is flooded. So it's just like not feasible for them to do these one-off things, because everything the recruiter is going to do is going to be somewhat systematized, because they have to think about many of these conversations. So that's the first one. It's just like not enough bandwidth to do it thoughtfully, at least. And then the second piece, how much is the second piece around maybe like covering the company from a liability, or, not wanting to give feedback that could be used? And so, that's a reason I hear sometimes like they don't share feedback because they don't want you to like sue them based on what you say. So they just err on the side of saying nothing. Like how often is that happening?
So one thing, maybe you lumped it into your first one, but certainly I want to call it is the trade-offs. So it's like, yeah, technically I could respond to every applicant that came in today, but that now takes away my time from closing this candidate over here. So there's a trade-off to every decision that you make in your time. paired with that volume as an issue. And then yes, I think that companies have different positions in terms of what they are willing to put in writing, and particularly when you have such a risky zone of cultural fit. If you tell someone they were not a cultural fit, there's a lot of subjectivity in that. And if you have, like, I've seen in sales populations, it's kind of funny actually, but they're the ones that are more willing to call you and negotiate and debate and try to get back in if you just rejected them, by the way. And maybe that's what they should be doing in their interview process, because that's what you want them doing with the customers, right? So every once in a while, you get a salesperson that comes in and likes to themselves.
That's a good fit. That's a strong salesperson. I don't know if they're a good fit for that company, but I appreciate the hustle. You definitely want that objection handling and not giving up in a salesperson. But sorry, keep going.
Yeah, but in that case, though, when we're talking about values, if you're going to talk, culture, I would really encourage people, if they're going to have that conversation and open themselves to that conversation and the risk that's associated with that, to get really crystal clear on what is this culture? What are the values? How do we define what's good and what's bad? And heck, someone's so subjective. But like, I've had situations where a candidate blasted me. It was anonymous, but she blasted on LinkedIn about how this recruiter didn't give her feedback, even though I had gone of like, hey, feel free to call me if you want feedback. And she didn't.
I tell people, by the way, if you're listening to this and you ever have a recruiter offer you the chance to get feedback on why the role did not work out, take them up on it. Take them up on it, please. Like, they're going to tell you something you don't know. They're going to tell you either something that they messed up internally, which is a reason that you didn't get the job, like their expectations shifted, you help them learn something, like business needs changed, maybe they're struggling with hitting their goals for whatever the quarter of the year and there's no headcount anymore. Someone got promoted internally. There's like a million reasons why you could have not gotten the job. And if you just rely on your own story that you're telling yourself in your head, it's most likely going to be wrong. So yeah, I think that's really true. Important.
And then also I really like the tip to ask at the end of the interview, what are your hesitations about me? And I did that at Palantir, and he answered, and I had the opportunity to respond. And I think that's what kept me in the process, probably. And so if you don't have the feedback or know exactly what they're thinking, you can't have an opportunity to address it. So I think that not just for after the interview process, collecting the feedback, but while you are talking to them, that might be a better moment before they've already decided to reject you.
Wait, okay, that's a really good point, because Troy mentioned that too, and I wish I asked this back then, but I'm going to ask you now. So like in a lot of these interviews, there's, like it starts with the interviewer asking the candidate questions, and it's usually skewed towards most of the time spent on by the interviewer asking the candidate a question. But then usually in most interviews, there's time at the end for the candidate to ask the interviewer some questions. Is that when you would you use that time to ask that question versus asking them something about like the job or the role? Get more about interest. Can you say more on that?
Yes. Well, so in my case, I didn't have a lot of time to ask questions. It was like, just, all right, nice to see you. Bye. And I had to squeeze in like, hey, I just have to ask you. And just make sure that question happens. Not every interview process is going to be super thoughtful towards the candidate asking questions. But I would say most processes does carve out time for that at the end, and that is where you should ask it. And I would even suggest maybe asking that prioritized over asking more about the company, because hopefully you did a lot of research on the company. Hopefully you have other interviews to ask questions about the company and ask the recruiter about the company. But this is really your moment to level with the interviewer. And it takes balls. It is scary to ask. No one likes to hear why they are maybe leaning away from saying yes, but I think it could have a huge dividend.
Yeah, I did that when I was interviewing for my internship at Asana. After every interview, I was like, hey, is there anything that I could have done better here? And
that's why you got the job.
Probably. I mean, they were like, hey, it was the first time they were hiring a PM intern, and they're like, oh, we don't really know if this person has the skill sets to do it, but they have a growth mindset. So they have a growth mindset.
Yes.
I'm curious, would you have people ask after, especially for PM loops, right? You talk to engineering, you talk to design, maybe you talk to an executive. Do you recommend, is there some stakeholders that you would maybe be like, maybe it's not a good idea. Might get canceled for saying this, but just a generalization. Sometimes conversations with engineering leaders can be a little bit more awkward. I think PMs and other stakeholders are more comfortable.
They would admit that, by the way. Most of them embrace that's true.
Probably, yeah. But like, if I tell them like a question that's a little bit awkward that puts them in the spot, like they might react negatively and like remember that. And my concern that I always thought was like, maybe they think like, oh, like
Mm.
I don't like how that person made me feel because they pushed me and made me feel uncomfortable. So anyways, a long way to say, like, is there any conversations maybe that you should avoid asking that question because it can
Yeah.
backfire?
Yes, here's the thing. There are it's risky. Another thing I'm thinking of is in my Palantir interview process, I interviewed with the founder. This is back when they did that for everybody. And when I met him, the first thing I said, I was just like, I'm nervous. And I think maybe you can appreciate it because I just leveled with him and it kind of cleared the air and it was like, made me feel a little bit better by saying it out loud. But then I had an interview process at Figma where that was actually like, well, does she not think she can do this job? And it's like, it is a risk. You don't know how some of these things are going to land with people. And so there is a little bit of like, well, when they find the right spot, they'll appreciate what I'm bringing here. I would say that you have to use some of your intuition around that one and just like, what is this rapport that you have with this person? And do you feel like you could say something like that? And it's not one of those things where you want to repeat the question at every single interview that you do, because all these people are going to meet up and they're going to all just like maybe say that you took a cop out by just having the same question for everyone. Like sometimes candidates get judged for that. You want to layer on more questions. So I think that maybe the person to ask is the hiring manager, because that is the person that makes the decision. And that hopefully is the person that you spent the most time with in a startup recruiting process. I understand that might not always be the case, but in a startup recruiting process, the hiring manager is going to be the one to have follow-up questions if they need more information to get it over the edge.
Yeah.
What about the recruiter? Same with the recruiter, like on the recruiter screen, would you always ask that at the end too?
I would say particularly in maybe the on-site prep call, I guess you do in your recruiter screen too. I've been asked that question before. I just think the recruiter is one you can maybe ask it every time and just be like, hey, what are people thinking? Is there something you think I could emphasize a little more?
Yeah. I almost wonder if with the recruiter too, you can frame it more of like, hey, we're both on the same team. Like, how can we make this more compelling? And based on what you know on like, based on how you know about like the hiring manager or the engineering director or whatever, like, what do you think are going to be the hesitations that they're going to have on me? And like, that also maybe have tripped up some other candidates. And like, what do you think based on what you know about me might be a good idea for me to practice this story or have this thing prepared? Like, I think that can be more, I think that can be probably more productive, right? In a way.
As the recruiter, I like that question because you have to consider how many phone calls they're having that go the same way over and over. And it like get really boring actually, when you have just like, all right, let me give my 5 basic talk points of the company. Let me ask my standard experience and take questions. And so that question makes the conversation really interesting.
Yeah. And also makes you feel good, right? Like you're like, hey, like this person is asking me for my expertise.
Yeah.
They understand the complexity and the nuance of my role. And now it's my moment to shine. Like, actually, that's probably like what a really fun part of the role, right? Being strategic about like navigating this process and like really understanding the interpersonal dynamics of like a complex interview loop, right? Like another thing that I really like that I think this was shared by Akash Gupta. We had him pretty early on, and he thinks a lot about the interview process, especially for like product leaders. And he said one of the things that he always recommend doing people is like trying to get into like a texting basis with the hiring manager, and then like giving like an update after every interview. Be like, hey, by the way, like I think I did well here, but I messed up this part for XYZ reason. Just wanted to share for transparency. And that also kind of shows like that self-awareness that then they'll be like, oh, cool. Like this person actually like knows their blind spots. And it's kind of having the same effect too of like they're putting it's almost like gives you a sense of like, how would it be to work with this person and communicate with them? And like, it almost feels like, oh, like we're on the same team in a weird way.
Yeah. So much of your job is getting feedback. And I think so much of success is those that can take it really neutrally and adapt and get better and improved and iterate and see it as cheesy as it is as a gift. Like this is just how we build tech products. We get feedback from the customers, we get feedback from everyone. Like I definitely try to neutralize that as a concept of my team of like, this is just part of the process. And so I think if you're able to demonstrate that in any way in the interview process and give it the experience of what it would actually be like to work with you, and you can send a follow-up email. And I definitely think candidates should send a follow-up email and say thank you at a minimum, because that art has kind of gone away.
Yeah, what do
I
you
tell
think?
people it'll never put you over the fence. Like basically, if they're leaning towards not giving you the job and you send a nice thank you note, I generally think it's probably not going to change their mind on it. But do you think it's like, first of all, do you agree with that? And do you think there's ever a scenario where like a thank you note can actually make a difference?
I think the thank you note isn't going to change their mind. Possibly that prior example from Mark of, this is an area I don't think I did so well, and this is how I would respond, or maybe even producing a rework of the issue. I've seen that move the needle for sure. But I will say, yes, there are some hiring managers who are just like, no, thank you. No, I don't know. That just seems like big miss and so easy to do and could really work against you.
Yeah. Another question that I ask myself is like, okay, like what is the minimum viable thank you note? Because like I feel like a very shitty thank you note is almost like worse than like no thank you note in a way. Like if it just feels like super impersonal and just like checking a box is like, like
it's better than nothing. But yeah, take a minute. Like how hard is it to get these interviews lately? So just make it custom to that conversation with that person. Don't copy paste every person you interviewed with.
Yeah. I mean, something that stuck out to you or something that makes you feel particularly excited based on something new that was covered in that conversation that would like basically say like, yeah, I actually didn't even know about this thing, but when we talked about it, I think it got me even more excited about the role because XYZ reason. Do you think it's okay also in the follow-up note to like ask, is there any, like, is it too awkward to ask, is there anything I could have done better? Or is there, do you have any hesitations? Like, has the window passed at that point? If we make it about the hiring manager specifically, let's say.
Wow. I don't know if I've ever seen that one, actually. I think it's a little, well, so the timing goes like, does the recruiter know yet? Or are you emailing the recruiter at this point? But just like in the flow of the interview, they have to do the interviews and then they have to debrief on the interviews. And that's where they distill what you could have done better. And I think that they're probably going to make their decision in that debriefing process. And I think by the time you have the information to respond to the question, it might be a little late. But to your guys' earlier points, I think all the feedback in the world is helpful to your next search, even if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is almost better to probably like ask that feedback after the decision is made, like versus before, because even if you ask it for before, it's like, it might not move the needle as much. Like maybe it's better to use that time to be like, hey, here's one thing that I just want to call out that as I was reflecting, I would have done differently. That might maybe be more of a bull needle than actually asking for feedback, which might be maybe annoying to be like, oh, now I need to like take out of my time of my precious day and like write something and have to address this question. That's a little bit annoying versus just like, cool, like I received this, I've read it, this is helpful.
Yeah. But I think what I'm calling out is like, there's the feedback after you find out the rejection and trying to get to learn what happened there. That's one type of feedback. The other is the kind that you kind of mentioned, Anneli, in your Palantir interview, where at the end you asked, like, do you have any hesitations about me for this role or so? I think that's what you asked. Basically,
you have to catch them before they've made their decision.
Totally.
Yeah, you're saying that's like a salvageable moment. And what you're basically asking is, are there any must-haves for this role that you feel like I'm just not meeting based on this conversation? And then you want to, and if they say it and you're like, yeah, fair point, like I don't have that, maybe at least
Could be.
But if there's something that you're like, actually, I do have that, like there's a story. I'd love to tell you a story about that, actually.
Yeah. You might not have a ton of time, but hopefully you're able to produce something really concise. So in my case, the concern was that it was very finance focused before this position. And the position was to do many more things in finance recruiting. But I was able to articulate, well, within this umbrella, I recruited for private equity firms and for tech companies and for startups and for big companies. And I also did investor relations and blah, blah, blah. Like I was able to elaborate in a way of like, I'm going to be able to learn and adapt. And this is going to apply in the future to this position.
Yeah. And Ben, my point was more of like, I think getting that feedback in writing via email is just like one, I think probably could be a liability for people, right? Like also it's like a much bigger ask, right? Like having to write it. And then also it doesn't really invite that much for that back and forth. So I really do think that like catching them in person while it's fresh, it's probably like 10x more likely to be effective than trying to get them to write it, unless they are willing to get on a call. But I feel like that also is a crazy.
That's what I was going to say. Is if they have a hard stop, and you want to ask the question, but they literally are like, sorry, I got to run. And you can get them a thank you note following, like a thoughtful thank you note within like, I don't know, 15 minutes after finishing the call into their inbox, and include like almost like a 15-minute Calendly link or something for them to grab time. It's like, if you have any hesitations about my candidacy for the role, or if there's any areas where you feel like you just didn't get a good enough feel for whether I have some of the must-have experience, like, I'd love to spend more time. Feel free to grab 15 minutes with me, and I'm happy to extend the interview and cover anything we missed. Like,
Yes.
I don't know if there's a world in which that hurts you as a candidate.
There's a world in which everything hurts you. So that's the problem. People have different personalities. Companies have different cultures. A lot of this has to be just based on some judgment. Just like, what are the vibes you're getting from every person you talk to?
Yeah. But maybe I feel like a lot of these things, when they hurt you, that they long term they help you, because maybe like, hey, like, this means like that's how I operate, that's how I roll. So like, if they're like, if that rubbed them the wrong way, maybe that's a good sign that I'm not gonna thrive in this company, because I'm a quote unquote like a loose cannon, and I like always be pushing for more, and that's how I get things done. And if that's not what the company's gonna reward, like, then hey, I just dodged a bullet here.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, this is what I'm saying. It goes back to, I won't repeat it, but it's just like back to the privilege thing. Like, if you're in that position, you actually want to be filtering out companies that you're going to be miserable at, that you're not going to get along with people that aren't going to appreciate you. I'm curious, because you guys have been working on these hiring guides for different sorts of companies, and you are seeing how there's kind of diversity in what they value and how to be successful in the processes. Would you pull out anything as commonalities between all of them of how to be successful?
Yeah, I would start by saying, like, you really need to understand the specific company that you're interviewing with, and like what they value, like their culture, because they're going to be looking for signals that you're going to be a good fit there throughout every conversation and every stage of the interview process. And that seems to be true across all the companies. Like, I don't think that's not true. I don't think there's ever a company that's like, actually doesn't help me to tailor my stories to their culture. And then, yeah, I would say another commonality is like the basic structure, I think, of the interview process is very similar. Recruiter screen followed by either like a high drop-off exercise, like a product screen, or a hiring manager conversation. So like usually some small commitment from the company, like 45 minutes to an hour of time for some kind of live exercise. And then if you get past, that's where like basically people start investing more, and whether maybe there's a take-home assignment or an on-site loop. But that basic structure seems pretty prevalent still. I don't know if it's going to change a lot. Not every company does homework, which I, by the way, plug to companies that don't do homework. You're the best. Like, I think candidates in this market are really struggling.
Companies don't do homework. What do you mean?
Some companies don't do homework. Like they don't give take home. Like DoorDash, for example, doesn't do a take home assignment.
Take home exercises. Got it.
Yeah. I would say, I mean, the other thing, just like universal truth, is like all these companies have really good recruiters that will be helpful if you ask for help. Like, we've universally heard, be like, hey, if you ask the right questions and you keep them in the loop, like, they'll give you all you need to prepare and be a successful candidate.
That's a huge one.
Yeah.
Like I think every guide we've put together, people have mentioned the importance of kind of like buddying up or cozying up with a recruiter and really making them feel like you care about them and that you're in it together and that you value their expertise. And, I mean, in a lot of ways, it seems to me like the most underutilized kind of like asset in the recruiting process, arguably, is candidates taking advantage of the relationship with the recruiter.
Yeah, like take advantage of the on-site prep call. Some people don't. Take advantage when they say, hey, I could take a call for feedback, do it. Like, it is a little bit strange how people...
And we see people that don't even have the recruiter offer that. The candidate will ask for it, and then the recruiter will say yes. And that's exactly what people should be doing. Like, don't wait for the recruiter to like offer it. Ask for some time.
Yeah. The last thing I'll add there too is, it seems like, and this is like kind of reading a little bit between the lines, but it seems like every company is really struggling to figure out what's the best kind of interview to get signal to then move someone into the on-site. And that's where we've seen the most amount of like change and experimentation that's happening with companies. Like, we see like the on-site loop stays pretty consistent and probably hasn't been changed in a long time. But what happens before the on-site is actually where a lot of people are constantly iterating and see, hey, can we get better signal? Can we change the order of these 2 interviews? Because this one has like, lower passing rates and therefore like we get better signal. But it's interesting, like the type of questions that companies ask at that level, they're also very similar. It's like for PMs, it's either a case and then some behavioral, right? Like, and I think that behavioral, that's where they're really trying to nail down into like, hey, what we were talking in the beginning, like, do you have that expertise? Do you have that? Have you worked in this industry? So yeah, that's like, that was to me the most interesting part of like, I feel like companies still feel like that they haven't cracked like the filtering mechanism to get people into the interview.
Yeah, well, and it makes sense from a metrics perspective too, because you spend so many resources on the on-site relative to the rest of the process. So you're spending multiple people's time. And so I see a lot of emphasis on the call just before, just to try to get that more predictably successful.
Yeah, the other thing that I think is really interesting, and then we can start wrapping, I know we're basically at time, is that it's kind of like there's 2 flavors of PM, at least for PM hiring. There's like processes that know exactly which role you're going for from the very beginning. So like Uber strikes me as an example of that kind of company. Like everything's tailor-made, like the entire interview process is like designed by the hiring manager in partnership with recruiting to like be almost like bespoke for a given role.
Same with Figma.
Yeah, same with Figma. And then Stripe has 2 tracks. Stripe has like a generalist track and also like a specialist track where like if they know exactly where they want to put you through, it's going to be slightly different than if they don't and they want to get you like Meta does, like to be offer approved and then you'll be hiring managers. DoorDash is a generalist process, so like they don't know which role you're going to go through first. So you're going to get through the whole process, then meet hiring managers. Even people that loved you during the interview process can like raise their hand and be like, can I have this person on my team? So I'd say like that specialist versus like role specific versus generalist track is something every company has at least an opinion about whether they're doing that. Cool. Well, I could keep talking about this for another hour, but I think we have to wrap. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic.
Yeah, so much fun.
And yeah, me too. And I can see Mark
excited for a part 2.
Yeah, if you guys are building hiring guides, if you ever want to chat about stuff, I'm here. But the thing is that more startup focused, obviously.
Yeah, we will. Right after we finish recording, we can talk a bit more about it, about an idea that could be. I have a good idea. But just as we close, if the audience is listening, 2 final questions for you. First one is, where can people learn more about you and what you're thinking about these days? And then secondly, how can they potentially be helpful to you?
Well, thanks. I'm answering the second question first, which is actually a little bit harder. How can people be helpful to me? I don't know. I'm good. If people want to reach out and connect, I'm always down to meet new people. But in terms of just learning more about my work and my thoughts and all that, LinkedIn is definitely the place. I am an open book. I'm constantly posting really long things about what I'm thinking and include some of the really hard things lately. So I'd say that's where I'm the most active.
Amazing. We'll add those links on our show notes. But yeah, this has been so much fun. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.